Good evening, welcome to everybody at home. This is the vote.je question time with today we're doing the Helier Central candidates, and pleased to say that we've got another full house this evening of all 9 candidates who are standing for 5 seats in Helier Central. I'm Gwyn Garfield-Bennett, I'll be the host tonight. First, I'm just going to give you some brief instructions on how this will run this evening. Please do start getting your questions in. You will see that there is a Q&A section on the Zoom webinar. Get your questions in. You can also upvote questions as well. So send those in now. We will have 1 minute. Every candidate will have 1 minute to answer the question, and it will be a strict 1 minute. We will be going round alphabetically, and each candidate will start, the next person will start first as we go along. Please keep your questions clean. I'm not going to ask questions which are obviously aimed at individual candidates. I want questions that all the candidates can answer, please. And we will make preference to any questions which are based in the constituency, although obviously there are a lot of questions which will be island-wide policy issues. So, first of all, welcome to all candidates. Thank you very much for coming. I'm going to say Karina Alves on my left here, who is Reform Jersey.
Hello, everybody. Good evening.
John Baker, who's standing as an independent.
Good evening.
Catherine Curtis, who is also Reform Jersey.
Good evening.
Lindsay Feltham, who is Reform Jersey.
Hello, everybody. Good evening.
Neil Kilby, who is standing as an independent.
Hello, everyone.
Jeff Southern, who is Reform Jersey.
Good evening.
Chris Tanguy, who is Jersey Alliance.
Good evening.
Julie Warman, who is Jersey Liberal Conservatives.
Good evening.
And Rob Ward from Reform Jersey.
Good evening.
Welcome to all. Okay, so I'm going to start getting stuck into the questions. We've only got a couple in so far, so do get your questions in at home. Ask your candidates. This is your opportunity to hear what they all want to say. So, first questions first. Graham Jones has asked, do you think Scrutiny has done enough to hold the government to account? Can they be doing more, and are there reforms needed? So it's going to go first to Karina.
Okay, thank you. I think Scrutiny has worked extremely hard in the past 4 years. As PPC chair, I was able to fight for some extra funding as well for the members' resources. So we've had a significant amount of extra staff have been taken on in the state's gref to ensure that we have enough resources there, and obviously members of staff as well to support us. I think there's always room for improvement, and obviously whatever we can do to increase Scrutiny's capacity as a party, I know that we would strongly support that.
Thank you. John?
Well, I really do appreciate what Scrutiny's done. It's improved its role over the last few years, certainly the last 12 months, but I really do feel it needs more teeth. I think a lot of the time that the various scrutiny panels are frustrated by lack of information and the slowness of information coming in particular from states departments. So as I say, if Scrutiny had more teeth, then maybe some more rules and regulations that would encourage, almost force information to come from these departments. And I'd also like to see Scrutiny extended. I think some of those scrutiny panels have too much of a workload. So maybe the role of Scrutiny could be extended by the panels taking on more specific roles.
Thank you. Catherine?
Yeah, I think Scrutiny does a great job. I think they have a very difficult job to do. I think that there's a lot more to take into account to do with government accountability. So we in Reform Jersey have got some great plans that we want to put into place, which hopefully will make Scrutiny's job easier as well. Certainly to streamline the lines of accountability from departments so that each minister has a clear responsibility.
Thank you. Lindsay?
As chairperson of Reform Jersey, I've worked very closely with our 5 sitting states members who've taken on some very key roles in Scrutiny. I think they've done a fantastic job. I've also seen all of that work that they've done behind the scenes. My main comments about Scrutiny and the Scrutiny process is that government actually hasn't taken Scrutiny serious enough. And I think that is where government needs to be held more accountable. They need to take Scrutiny more seriously. Also, I think we need to acknowledge the role of the Public Accounts Committee, which has done some fantastic work in this term. So absolutely, scrutiny has a key role to play. As Karina said earlier, it's good to see that scrutiny is getting more support via the state's graph, and I hope that scrutiny will continue to be supported more for the key role that it plays in the next term of office.
Thank you, Neil.
I think the government needs to be run much more like a business. I think it's a £1 billion a year business, and we need to have objectives, we need to have accountability, and we need to have transparency. And I think that's what most of the voters and the people that I'm speaking to are saying, is they don't see what they voted for 4 years ago happening in the 4 years subsequent to the point that they voted. So we get voter apathy, and we get a situation, well, I think they're disappointed in what they see as the results from what they voted for 4 years ago. So scrutiny is obviously an important thing, but we need the transparency and the accountability.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yes, the problem with many scrutiny panels is that they make recommendations, and those recommendations don't get followed up, so they just disappear onto the nearest shelf, because ministers want to ignore them. They pretend to do things, they don't do things. What's needed is the teeth, which is involved in putting propositions, so that there must be a debate as a result of a report, and people must actually get to a vote. Do we want to do this recommendation or otherwise? I've found in the past as well that many people, independents if you like, amateurs, come into the States and really don't know how to ask proper questions. They must be focused, and people must behave themselves in terms of making sure that the hows and the whys get answered as well.
Thank you. Okay, Chris.
By the time you get round to the end of the round here, a lot of it's already been said. I have to agree with John and Jeff that they have done a great job. But as a small business owner in Jersey, and having suffered through the pandemic and the co-funding payroll, again, scrutiny said this, they said that, but it never got anywhere. And this always seems the problem to me. It's great to scrutinise anything, but if there's no bones to it, and there's no one, again, it's said time and time again, no transparency, no one's ever held accountable. We need a scrutiny panel, but if it's got no teeth, which has been said before, you know, why? I mean, we need more teeth in scrutiny.
Thank you. Okay, Julie.
This whole OneGov model, which Charlie Parker created, also brought in this scrutiny panel. Now, to be fair to scrutiny, they did the best that they could with the tools they had, but we have to get the government right, we have to get the structure right, so that when scrutiny do go into challenging certain areas of government, that they are allowed to see it through. And I see shaking heads here, but I'm afraid to say scrutiny must scrutinise and be entitled to that scrutiny and to get on with the job. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you. Scrutiny has existed for many, many years before OneGov. I chair the Children, Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel. We've made a number of significant recommendations and brought a number of reports to the Assembly. Many of those recommendations aren't acted upon simply because there is not government will. However, we've also brought propositions, many propositions, to increase funding, to protect the funding for public service ombudsman, to get changes to the children's law, for the children's commissioner, so she can actually get access to information, which is the transparency. The good news is there are glimmers of hope with the new CEO, who's recommending a recommendation tracker, so that we can actually track the recommendations and make sure they're implemented. And that's the key. Government, scrutiny, and the civil service are three parts of governance. And if we get those three parts right and they work together, then we have good governance. We have a poor government, we've had a poor alliance-led government, and that's the problem that we have. There's been no respect for scrutiny. Scrutiny's had to fight way too hard to get the things done that we should have got done.
Thank you very much. So that's the end of the first question. So please do get your questions in to the candidates this evening. This is your opportunity to hear what they all say on the issues that matter to you. So I'm going to go with the next question, which is from Jane Corbett, who is asking, do you think that those who want to represent St Helier should live in St Helier? And on the same point, shouldn't any candidate for Minister or Chief Minister live in Jersey full time? That's from Jane Corbett, and we'll go to John first.
Well, yes, I absolutely agree. I mean, although I'm standing in Central, I still live in St Helier. I was born in St Helier. I went to school. I went in fact to school in Helcott Place Primary School, and then St Mark's School, and then Helier. And I lived in St Mark's Road as a child, and we moved to a flat in King Street. I eventually moved out to the country, but I've since moved back, and St Helier's my home, and I love it. And I really do feel that candidates that stand from particularly far-flung parishes, and then we don't see them, in terms of the community involvement as much as we see the ones that live in St Helier. So I think it should be something that should be long, hard and thought and perhaps debated. Because certainly constables have to live in their parish, and I think maybe deputies should.
Thank you, Catherine.
Well, I live in the district. I live at an address in Stopford Road, so I experience St Helier Central every day. I don't think that deputies have to live in the district, though. I think they have to have a connection with the district. So I think if somebody lives in St Wands, I do wonder, why are they standing in St Helier Central? But I think it doesn't. There will be reasons why people might have a strong connection sometimes. As for Chief Minister, yes, the Chief Minister should definitely live in Jersey.
Thank you. Lindsay.
I also agree that anybody standing in a constituency should have a connection with that constituency. As the chair of the party, I also chaired the selection committee, aside from when I stood before the committee myself. And one of the key questions that we asked each and every candidate was, why this particular constituency, why this district, and what will you do for the people of the district, and what connection do you have with the people for the district? The question of Chief Minister is an interesting one. Yes, absolutely, the Chief Minister should be committed to the island, as should every single state's member. And I would expect that a Chief Minister, an incoming Chief Minister, should have lived in the island for many years in the approach to this election.
Okay, thank you, Neil.
I live in the district. I think it's fantastic. You've got all the access to everything in walking distance. It's a great place to live. It really is. But we do have our problems with density, and we have everybody else's traffic come through us. So I think it's important that you are a resident in the area. I'm not quite sure what connection means, when everybody else talks about their connection, but I think it's important that you do. But as a island-wide election that we're having for an island-wide government, it's important. Is it important that somebody is a deputy in one area when you're actually talking about senatorial level votes? So yes, I do personally. Why else are you standing in that area unless you have a strong connection with it, which is, do you have a business in it or do you live in it?
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Yes, all the Reform Jersey candidates live in St Helier, and this habit that people from other parishes have of seeing St Helier as easy pickings when they come along, sweep up the votes, is to be denigrated. And I'm thinking simply of, for example, I'm a deputy in St Helier, and when I was obstinate in the States and insisted that we fund the town park because we're desperate in need of green space, that got through. I wasn't in St Mary, I wasn't in St One, the green parishes already. I was in St Helier, where we need to green up and we need our the benefit of that greening, and that absolutely intrinsic to living in St Helier. As the Chief Minister who tries to live elsewhere or spends significant time elsewhere should be removed.
Thank you. Okay, Chris.
I don't live in the district, but the Tangies and their connection go back an awful long time. none of you will remember, but Taggy's Dairy, which was in Don Road, the original building is still there. My uncle Cyril was in the States for 18 years. He served in the district of St Helier. There were just different districts then. And my business connection, I've had my business for 13 years in St Helier. And my connections actually go back probably 40 years. And I've seen St Helier change so much, certainly central St Helier, because that was the feeding ground for my days at certain nightclubs, which you might have frequented. But what I am seeing is the regeneration of St Helier Central with what's happening in Bar Street, the investment by the Musrares. It's been a long time coming. It's amazing to see. And what I'm seeing now is very exciting, and it's an exciting time to be part of the new St Helier Central.
Thank you. Julie?
I do live in St Helier Central, very proud to live there. I love the town. I think it's a fantastic place. I agree with Mr. Tanguy. It's got great potential. There's much work to do. The Millennium Park, I would like to see extended. I know Reform at some stage tried to stop it, but I would certainly want to see it extended. Also, I have a great affinity with St Helier all my life. I'm not far from my father, who I care for. And also, I think we're in very exciting times. The Chief Minister, I think he should be living here. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Rob?
As already said, I live in St Helier. The connections are things such as I know many of the families because of the children. I've been a teacher on the island for 20 years, so you have those connections there. It's very important that you understand the needs of St Helier. We actually protected the town park from development, which was in the background and has not gone away. We need an intelligent understanding of that situation. In terms of Chief Minister, I say yes, you should live on the island. I'd go further. Ministers should be resident and on the island and not frequently off island. And all states members should commit to the full-time job, not have a part-time job where they run significant businesses that take significant time away from them outside the Assembly, so they cannot commit 100% to the members of St Helier Central and represent them properly in the district. We have 2 extra seats in this Assembly, thanks to the work that Deputy Alves has done. We need to use them wisely so that we have the best representation, and we need people who will commit to that 100%.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think it should be a requirement to live in the district. I think it is important to have some connection to it. Personally, I lived in the district for many years growing up. I lived in St Mark's Road, I've lived in David Place, I lived in Halkett Street. I wanted to actually buy in the district but wasn't able to because of house prices and availability of certain facilities that we wanted as a family. I'm sure there'll probably be a question about that later on. But with regards, I think ultimately it's democracy and it's down to the will of the people as to who is elected in the area. But I do think that it is important that there is some tie there, or some connection. I think with regards to ministers and chief ministers and whatever else living in the island, at the moment there is a requirement that they have to be on the island for 6 months before standing for election. Maybe this is something that needs to be looked at and expanded on and maybe lengthen that requirement.
Thank you. Okay. Don't forget at home you can put your questions in. You can also upvote questions as well. So I'm going to go to Tracy's question next, which is what happened to the north of St Helier Masterplan, and what would be your vision for this area? So I'm going to go first to Catherine.
Okay, well, I will need to find out what's happened to the north of St Helier Masterplan. My vision would be for, first of all, a lot more trees. I mean, I actually live in this area. So just going about, walking around the roads, it's so much nicer where we've got trees and flowers. It does actually make a big difference. I would like to see safe walking routes through this part of St Helier. And I was quite inspired by the new development on the Ann Street Brewery site, because that's got a lovely walkway right through it with a little wooded area. And so, yeah, safe walking routes, safe cycling as well, because when I go out on my bike in that area, I don't feel very safe. A lot more trees, which would be good for biodiversity as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Lindsay.
That is a very good question. What did happen to the North of St Helier master plan? I think we need a master plan for St Helier, one that encompasses the whole of the parish, but also we need to stop piecemeal planning, the type of piecemeal decision making that we saw during the island plan debate, where we saw field by field decision making and decision making on very small parts of the island. So I think that planning on an island-wide basis needs to be holistic. When we come back to St Helier and the north of St Helier, there's some really important improvements that need to happen. I'd like to set Julie correct actually, because Reform Jersey does support the expansion of Millennium Park. What we would also like to see in addition to the expansion of the park is the much needed primary school, because there are several families that live in the north of St Helier in this district that currently have to drive their children out of town to go to school. And that,
thank you. Sorry, that's okay. Thank you very much. Neil.
There's the Miller plan, or the Miller plan for St Helier. That said it all. If everybody reads it, it was originally done in 2006 and revised in 2018. There's nothing in there that I can contradict, really. So it's already been done, and we're not doing it, or we're re-going through it again. St Helier is incredibly built up with traffic, so everything that everybody's saying about cycle routes and routes through the city, through the town, is incredibly important. So, but yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
Anything that calls itself a master plan is doomed. That's my experience in the States. Because what happens is we debate things for hours on end and come up with a good plan and agree it all, and then the government says, well, we're not funding it, don't be silly. You don't want to spend money on St Helier, they can look after themselves. And that's the reality. What we need, we're about to be elected, some of us, for 4 years, but what we need is long-term vision, 10 years, 20 years, 15 years, and then we might see some things through. And one thing where the funding was pulled was a hopper bus. We should have had a hopper bus. My proposition was accepted by the states wholeheartedly. We said we were going to do it, and then at the end of the term, they pulled the funding on that, so never out spending that. And that's the problem always with St Helier.
Thank you. Okay, Chris.
Excuse my ignorance, but the North-South master plan, I presume that does encompass the centre as well now, because it is 3 districts. I'd like to see it clean and green. As a business owner in Mulcaster Street, the amount of traffic and the filth and the dirt, St Helier is not clean. We just need to make it a place of taxi drivers and car owners are going to hate me for saying this, but most city centres that I know in parts of the UK are off limits to cars. Let's make it a place that people want to come. Let's get the vibe going like they are in Bath Street, a place where people want. Let's see more restaurants. Let's see more a living, thriving St Helier all round, and a happy place for everybody to be. It deserves it, and we'll get there.
Thank you, Julie.
So I would love to see whoever gets voted, North, South or Central, that they all combine together, because together St Helier will be stronger. The park was stopped for some reason, but anyway, we're going to move that forward now, start extending it and make it green and clean. And I do agree with you that people coming in from the countryside to perhaps think, well, let's not take 2 cars in, let's take 1. Let's think of the people in the town. Let's give them, the fresh air that they deserve, and let's all prosper. So in answer to your question about the North, the South and the Central, it reminds me of Ireland, by the way. Let's all work together and let's make this a fantastic town. I know it can be done. And when you say, well, we need a bit more time, well, actually, we need to get on with the job. You're in for so many years, and that's it. Get on with the job.
Thank you. Rob.
A Norfolk Town plan is an example of how many people want to sit around and talk about what they want to do, but never actually act on it. What my vision and Reform's vision for the centre of St Helier is to have an extended park of a brand new primary school is desperately needed, so that our children can walk to school through a green space safely with their families and breathe clean air. And then we can make smaller parks around town so that green space is a feature of St Helier and not an anomaly, which is the problem. And by doing that, we have to change the Bridge and Island plan, which allows developers to buy off their green space requirement by simply putting money into other areas. It will not work for St Helier. Overdevelopment of St Helier is dangerous for everyone involved. We need to protect the park because there is already building regulation on it. There are building plans that are there and ready to go. My proposition stopped that happening. Otherwise, we would have had an estate built a huge proportion smack bang in the centre of St Helier was not affordable.
Thank you. Karina.
Thank you. Not wishing to repeat anything that obviously my party colleagues have already said. I think what happened with the master plan was just a lack of political and government will and drive. Parliamentary decisions aren't always taken forward, and we've already had a couple mentioned tonight. Part of this is because the Assembly is actually, St Helier is significantly underrepresented in the Assembly. Obviously with these reforms, we've had some increase in numbers, but it's still not equal. And that's one of the things that obviously as a party we really stand for. So I think ultimately we need to ensure that the Parliament reflects our population and that the numbers of people in there are reflected by the population and the people that represent them. Obviously, I agree with protecting green areas, ensuring safety, and I think we also need to look at things like youth facilities. It's all very good and well having restaurants and hospitality, but actually youth facilities are really lacking for our youngsters in St Helier.
Thank you. John.
Well, the Norfolk Town Master Plan was something that was created and then put on a shelf, and it's been allowed to collect dust. The problem is not to bring it back and start taking action with it. We need to revisit it. And just to give you an example, my action group, Jersey Action Group, campaigned for quite a while against the building of the Jersey Finance Centre because we considered it to be just money and concrete buildings and not for people. Eventually, the objections we made to Building 5 instigated an inquiry, and the planning inspector, Philip Stanton, suggested that the Esplanade Quarter Master Plan needed revisiting. The then planning was Steve Luce revisited it, and now we've got an excellent Southwest Master Plan, which is about people and placemaking, not buildings. And I think that's the way we've got to look at, well, in fact, the whole of the town, but certainly the town centre and the district we're looking at, and the idea that we should certainly extend Millennium Park. But my big plan for St Helier is to make it a golden city, and that's about greening the streets and making more play areas.
Thank you very much. Okay, just a reminder, everybody at home, we've got all 9 candidates here for St Helier Central for the 5 seats that are up for grabs. Please do get your questions into them. I'm going to do a couple on one of the very hot topics, which is undoubtedly going to affect everybody, and that's about housing. So David M has said, so many people are leaving Jersey due to ridiculous house prices and the cost of living. But who is to blame, and what can be done about this when average wages have lagged so far behind the average cost of accommodation? And that will go first to Lindsay.
I'll try and bundle this up into a minute, but I'm sure my Reform Jersey colleagues will help me. The first thing that we will do, if elected to government, is declare a housing crisis. Governments for decades have not addressed this problem. So when you ask who is to blame, it's politicians of the past and it's consensus governments. It's the lack of party politics, that very, very slow decision making, and the lack of manifestos. So our manifesto is very, very clear about what we're going to do to address the housing situation, to bring housing prices lower and help people into the market. So if you vote for a Reform Jersey candidate, you know that that candidate has a contract with you to bring forward the housing crisis action plan. When it comes to the increasing cost of living and wage stagnation, we also want to see changes to the employment law and also the minimum wage being brought up to the living wage.
Thank you. Neil.
Yeah, there's housing prices around the world have just got ridiculous because interest rates have been so low, and it's made speculation into property a natural thing for investors to do outside of stock markets and outside of keeping their money in banks. So people with money are borrowing money and they're investing in properties. So we're seeing a lot of buy-to-lets, and there isn't the incoming amount of new building that's going up for it to be absorbed into that area. So that demand for property as an investment has pushed up prices everywhere around the world. But we're also seeing the lack of building in Jersey, which means that it's exacerbating that. For me personally, I think that it's important that we get right-sized housing rather than just putting up 3-bedroom houses everywhere with gardens and 2 parking spaces. We need to be putting up spaces for young couples to move into, and then as they grow, they will move into bigger areas, bigger properties as their families grow. But the essential element is that we just haven't got enough coming in, and it's all doing is buy-to-let.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. What we must do is take control of rents. That's simple and very straightforward to be done. If we model ourselves on the European model, then that is possible. I remember the time when means-tested rent was the order of the day, and no one in social housing had to pay more than 1/3 of their income in the rent. And that is a way forward. We could revisit that and reimpose that. And the problem essentially is that this government has allowed rich foreigners to buy up property willy-nilly in town and on the island. And that can't be allowed to carry on, because the result is what we see today: young people unable to move into a decent property either to rent or to buy. And that's the reality, and we cannot have that in our society.
Thank you, Chris.
I think Jeff stole my thunder there, but don't worry. Yes, it was under Mr. Ozef many years ago that he, if you were a 1-1K and you moved to the island, you were only allowed to move here and buy one property. You couldn't rent for 4 or 5 years and then decide, well, I might stay or I might not. And then they were suddenly allowed to go and become property speculators and buy up properties, let's say between £1 million, £1.5 million, and then spend X on them and then flip them at 3, 4. This has not helped at all. And also the outside investors who have been buying up, let's say 10 apartments in Castle Key or whatever, because the interest rates are so low, they're making a better return on their investment by just buying bricks and mortar, which has always been the way. And a combination of all these factors have helped to drive the prices to where they are today.
Thank you, Julie.
I do agree, but I think that there's also a multi approach here. There's quite a few brownfields. There's an awful lot of vacant properties. And if I was elected, I would be getting a report to find out why these properties are vacant. I also want to look at the rental market and to make sure that landlords do register and that there's a tenants helpline, because there's 3 strands to this. There's the rental market, there's the locating of where these vacant properties are and why they're vacant. And the third one is to allow young people like myself, who's renting, and many others, on the property ladder. We've got to get right in there right now.
Thank you, Rob.
One of the biggest problems is that Jersey-owned land is not being built on with affordable homes. The Assembly voted against a reform proposition to have 100% of that land being used for affordable homes for our families and our young people. So therefore, the track record of government members, of the other party members and independents, is to vote against that. It's also to vote against landlord licensing. We won the principles and it went back and they were lobbied by the 22 landlords in the Assembly and then voted against it. We have not put our people first when it comes to housing. Young people are leaving the island because they cannot afford it. And it's not those on low incomes only, it's those on middle incomes, on decent incomes who have no chance. We have a housing action crisis action plan, not easy to say, that will actually address the issues and make the difficult choices for people of this island to put them first. No other government, no other party, and I can't see any other independents who are willing to take that action.
Thank you very much, Karina.
Thank you. I think ultimately who's to blame, like it's been said, it's past governments and dare I say it, members with vested interests who have voted against multiple propositions that would enable people to buy their own homes and support them. I think ultimately the average house price just hasn't kept up with wages. We often refer to affordable housing, but yet there's no clear definition of what that is, especially when banks are only lending 5 times your wages. I know how difficult it is to save up for a deposit, especially I was fortunate enough to have help from my parents. So as a party, one of the things in our action plan is to look at a shared equity approach to enable first-time buyers and people wanting to buy. I think we've also mentioned outside investors. It's not just outside investors, it's inside investors as well. Many properties are being marketed as lock up and leave, which is just unacceptable.
Thank you. Okay, John.
Well, this goes back to a lack of population policy. This is a failing of a number of governments. But we've had an expanding finance industry. And of course, the pressure there is because of the salaries that are paid in the finance industry, people can easily afford the sort of luxury apartments that unfortunately the quangos that we have set up built. So we've got SOJBC building luxury apartments when they should be forced to build a percentage of social housing. We've got Ports of Jersey also more interested in profit than looking after the public. Witness the fact that they think it's more important to put car parking on amenity space recently at the steam clock. So we've got to change our priorities and get these states departments, the states quangos, to consider that they need to look after our housing needs. And we need to also look at house builders, so modular housing. I remember when the Radisson Hotel was built, and that was built in a modular way. I don't know what the costings were, but it went up very quickly. And if you do it with speed, you reduce costs. So there's all sorts of mod methods we could look at.
Thank you. Catherine.
Well, David, I think this is the really important question right now about housing, and the housing market is broken. I have a daughter who's 18, and what's happening with some of her friends is a tragedy, really, because they cannot afford to leave their parents' home, even if they get a good job, because there's no housing supplement for them. They can get income support till they're 25. Some of these young people, for whatever reason, the family doesn't want them in the home anymore, and they are going homeless. Homeless shelters are full up. Some of them are going to sleep in cars. There's quite a lot of sleeping in cars at the moment. It's a disgrace. And for Jersey, this is our priority. We have a housing crisis action plan, and we're going to act on it the moment that we are elected in government.
Okay, thank you very much. Many of you have touched on this, but I'm going to ask this question from Justin Lewis as well, because it's got other points in it. Are any of you landlords, and what are the candidates' views on local landlords owning multiple flats for the purpose of buy-to-lets and its general effect on the rental market? And I'll go first to Neil.
Well, it's a bit confusing. We were told in the census that with now an extra 1,000 properties that were empty. So there was supposed to be 4,000 or 5,000 properties that are empty. So we need to know what that detail is. No, I'm not a landlord, but my partner is, and I don't see it a problem. But if you're in the situation where the investment is so richly rewarded, especially in Jersey, because we don't have the amount of properties going up that should be going up, then the properties that are there are just going to go up in price. So it's just supply and demand. The market will always take advantage, and so we need to manage that market if it's not functioning properly, and it's just not at the moment. I agree with everybody here about the situation. There is not enough of the right size properties on the island, and they're certainly not affordable. But you know, it's slightly a function of things we can't control.
Thank you. Okay. Jeff.
Yeah, the starting point is that houses should be homes and not investments. and the dominance of investment in property just for profit is what we are facing here. We've already had a question on this, so this is going to be a short answer from me. But what we need to do is to properly regulate the housing market. It means intervening, and I think as a Social Democrat, that's what we should be doing. We should be functioning the way a government should function, where a market is in failure. Then we should interfere. We should regulate properly to make sure that we correct what has happened here, and we will if we get elected to power. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
No, I'm not a landlord, but I do believe we should have a landlord registry, which has been mooted for years and years, but every time it seems to get voted out of the States, certainly because certain members have vested interests. A fine example, not far from where I live in St Clements, there are 3 units standing empty, which shocks me beyond belief because the gentleman just doesn't want to rent them out and doesn't feel the need for it. These are the sort of examples that are happening all over the island. I mean, to have, is it 4,000 units unoccupied is disgraceful, and these landlords need to be held accountable. And if I should get voted in, it'll be one of my strong propositions that we certainly form a landlord's registry.
Julie.
Yes, I had a very good friend actually who was in an unqualified flat, and it broke my heart because you get some bad egg landlords and you get some good ones, and unfortunately the bad ones do need to be named in the landlord's register, and there does need to be a tenant helpline, because what happened to my friend, and I'm happy to have a separate conversation, must never happen again, and it was absolutely disgraceful. So I am not a landlady or a landlord, but I will certainly fight for unqualified and qualified tenants, because you know what? They deserve to be treated exactly the same. Thank you.
Rob?
I'm not a landlord. I brought the landlord licensing, which was ironically voted against by all members of the Alliance Party, and actually led the lobbying to end that. So I think we need to look at that carefully. One of the problems with multiple buy-to-lets is that people are in a fixed market. The market is not going to solve this problem. The first action of government should be to protect, support and look after its population. And we have whole sections of our population are not being protected in their housing. They are not being looked after to find a decent home, and they are not being supported to have any way of finding a future for themselves on this island. That's going to affect our population in a very dangerous way by changing the demographic of our population, and the younger people will not come back. My daughter has a degree. She's well qualified. She's extremely intelligent. Of course, I'm biased, but she's living at home because rent is so expensive. That's not right. She needs to have that opportunity to live her life.
Thank you, Karina.
Thank you. I'm not a landlord, and I'm not against landlords. I think what we do need to do is we do need to address the conditions that people are living in, and we need to make sure that rents are fair. If I look back to the first property I rented in St Mark's Road, which at the time was £550 per calendar month, I actually put it into the RPI calculator to see how much that would be now. It should be £750 a month. I've seen it marketed for £1,400. That's a massive increase, and it's completely unacceptable. There's been no sort of regulation there. One of the things, there's been no mechanism to allow people to appeal against rent rises as well. So one of the things that is in our action plan, and that our party leader, Senator Sam Mezek, was able to secure funding for, was a rental tribunal. And I think that's a really important step that needs to be put in place in order to support people.
Sorry, we're just trying to get the subtitles on for people at home. I do apologise. Fiddling with technology as one does. John.
Yes, well, I'm a landlord in a roundabout sort of way. I'm still running a business, but I've got a business partner who will certainly move things forward with me and leave me the time to work in the States. The property we have, I won't go into specifics, but it's a shop in the town centre. It's got 2 flats above, and the concept is the fact that we've taken on the whole building to run the property. It's been there for 30 years, the business I'm saying. So the 2 flats we've got are actually small flats that we've rented out to the same tenants, one for about 20 years and one for 10 years. And we keep the rents very reasonable, both of them well below £1,000 per month. We keep a very small amount of profit from that to keep repairs and renewals going, but the most of the money that we get income from those 2 flats goes straight to the head landlord. So as I say, I'm a landlord in a roundabout sort of way. I was quite shocked when I saw so many landlords in the States voting against regulation. And I certainly, even though I am a sort of roundabout landlord, would really want to protect tenants, and some of the propositions that were put, I would have voted in favour of.
Thank you. Catherine?
I'm not a landlord. I have been a landlord before. In fact, in the 1990s, when I owned a townhouse with my then husband, we actually took in a homeless family to live in the top part of our house, and they were fantastic tenants. They were there for a few years. They were on the front of the Evening Post at the time because they were losing their home. There's some really good landlords in Jersey. As a rates assessor, I see sometimes some landlords actually quite a lot of flats. They pay the occupiers rates as well for their tenants, but we can't rely on everyone to be like this. So we need regulation. That's what Reform Jersey is going to be bringing in.
Thank you, Lindsay.
I am not a landlord, and members of my family aren't, so I have no conflict of interest there. I think just picking up on this conversation, the terms landlord register and landlord regulation have been used interchangeably, and actually landlord licensing. What Reform Jersey supports is a landlord licensing scheme. At the moment, it is more difficult to sell an ice cream than it is to put a property up for rent, and that is wrong. And it's important that we don't confuse a register, which would not have the same power as a licensing scheme. I would like to invite, I can stand by my party's record in the States Chamber, and I would like to invite the members of other parties to go onto our website and check out the voting records of your party members on this very, very important issue, because I think you've got some quite serious conversations to have with some members of your party, Chris.
Thank you. Okay, right, next 2 questions. Well, next question is being upvoted as top question at the moment. It's for me, it's a bit negative. I'd like to see more positive questions rather than the way this one's angled, but we'll go for it. The last 4 years have seen significant overspends, the OneGov issues, hospital staffing issues. What would you say has been the biggest failures of the current government? I suppose I could also go with States Assembly as well. So that goes first to Jeff.
The biggest mistake is employing so many expensive consultants before acting. And what the problem there is that people go into the States without any political background, and therefore automatically they tend to rely on their senior officers for all aspects of policy, and they, in my opinion, quite foolishly believe the chief officer is always telling the truth, and when he says that things are hunky-dory, they tend to believe him. And what we need is people who go into the States with policy in order, well discussed, thrashed out, practical, capable of being done, and then we don't get officers running the whole ship. We get politicians who are accountable to the public running the ship, and that's the way it should be.
Chris.
It's just the constant overspend, and no one ever held accountable. It just seems to go on and on and on, and there never seems to be enough in-depth discussion. I mean, when you had committees, it was arguably a better system because you didn't have one person making that final decision, be it the hospital or whatever. And for me, I think the island is sick and tired of seeing money squandered and no one ever held accountable. I think the island is rightfully very, very angry, and let's hope we see some decent change on the 22nd of June.
Thank you, Julie.
This is a document. A lot of work went into it. JLC with the Progress Party. It's policy, it's 19 pages, and when we get elected, we are going to stand by this document as if it's a Bible, and we will go through page by page, and we will get this job done. Happy to, on an email, if you'd like to ask me, I can send you a hard copy, but this is not words, this is action, and we have policy in this document.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
The question was about the mistakes that have been made. There was one big mistake. It was called P1, a proposition that came to the States Assembly that gave away the accountability responsibility to one individual. The other mistake was the separation of the government of Jersey that seems to have lost its respect for the States Assembly. The government of Jersey has separated itself in its decision making. It has not given primacy to the States Assembly, which is what we have as a democracy. And that has been a real issue, because decisions have been made to spend money without coming to the States Assembly. And that is a huge error. The biggest waste of money, £500,000 on a CEO, the exact cost of giving free school meals to our children. That is the priority of the government that hopefully will be gone, and is not our priority. Those people voted against free school meals for our children. I would rather spend it on a CEO and their payoff because they got it wrong. And that needs to take responsibility by certain parties here. P1 was voted for by the leaders of other parties. We did not vote for P1.
Thank you, Karina.
I think aside from capital projects and things like the hospital that have been mentioned, obviously, ultimately, it comes down to people changing their mind, taking too long to implement decisions, a lack of real political oversight, which was mentioned by my party colleague, Jeff. And I think, for me personally, what I've seen is that reviews that are done by experts that cost a lot of money, when the recommendations are published, they are inconvenience to the government, or the government don't agree with the recommendations, and so therefore it's left on the shelf. And then in a few years' time, we need to do another follow-up review, and that's more money spent when the original review was absolutely fine. It was just the fact that the recommendations weren't convenient to those individuals there. I think if we are, as a party, we've always stuck to reviews, to recommendations, and we've always stuck by them. I think none of us can say that we are experts, so it's important to follow the expert advice.
Thank you, John.
Well, in a word, Parker. I think that's the biggest single mistake this government's made, and Ian Gorst and his cohorts brought Parker in. Parker said straight away, it's my way or the highway. And not only did he make lots of promises he didn't keep, he said he was going to slash the civil service, he was going to cut costs. He cost us a considerable amount of money in bringing in his UK friends and buddies, and on huge salaries. But the culture that he brought in was completely alien to Jersey. And we've now ended up with a situation where we've got a government and the states actually run by civil servants because they've just got too much power. So the spending that Parker brought was a problem. In the future, spending nearly £1 billion, as we will have to do as a hospital, that's going to be a mistake that we're going to make in the very near future unless we address that.
Thank you, Catherine.
It seems to me that for the last term that ministers have not been taking responsibility. They've been leaving everything to civil servants who generally try and do a really good job, but when civil servants have a budget, a department budget, then they want to spend it. I know that as a director, I've been a board director of quite a few companies, and it really surprises me that at every meeting there's not normally a full breakdown of costs and detailed plans, which you expect even in small business, really. So Reform Jersey want to change that. We want to see full costed plans at meetings in the future.
Thank you. Lindsay?
just moving on from what Catherine said, in our manifesto, what we highlight is actually within the government budgeting processes. What you see within the government plan, aside from any new money, is very broad heads of expenditure for departments. And what that could potentially lead to is slush funds, waste, and ultimately ministers not being accountable for the budgets that their departments are running. So we want to see accountability back to ministers. Rob previously referred to P1, and I think a rescindment of P1 is absolutely required. Ministers now need to be back accountable for their budgets. Also, where we've got a retention of staff is a problem within the states. Lots of use of consultants, which is very expensive. We actually need to be using our full-time civil servants, training them up if they need some more knowledge and education in certain areas. But actually what we need is full-time civil servants, not consultants.
Thank you very much. And Neil, finally, isn't it?
I'm going to agree with everyone because everybody seems to say exactly the same thing here. We don't have a direct link between the electorate, the assembly taking control of the ministers, and the ministers taking control of the departments and the expenditure. If this was a business, it would go bankrupt. Okay, it's £1,000 million a year that we're spending. That's £10,000 near enough in round figures for every single person, and your vote counts. So first of all, if you don't vote, we don't have enough strength as members of the assembly, and then those members of assembly, you know, if you compare it to the UK, the members of assembly would lose their deposit in the UK for the amount of votes that they get, not percentage wise, but the votes that they get, and they are not strong enough for the to be in control. And so the states, the civil servants have to take control. So we need that strength to come back to the assembly by having good quality people in there.
Thank you. Okay. Next question is, we'll rattle on because we've got lots of questions to get through. It's from Megan Johnson. If you were to be elected, who would you be your preferred coalition partner? Would you go into coalition with any other parties or individuals for that matter? First one goes to Chris.
Me.
Sorry, me again. Jeff will first go again. Yes, to Chris.
Throw me the curveball. I think it's always a little bit early to say who we would like to cozy up to, but having met quite a few of the candidates, I've been very impressed actually. I think we've had some bad vibes from certain trollers on the wonderful Facebook, but I think the standard of candidates is actually very high, and it's very across the board. And without mentioning particular parties, there's quite a lot of people I would be happy to work with. Can I just make one correction though? Reform keeps saying it's an alliance-led government. The Alliance Party was only formed 10 months ago. The 5 members of the Alliance that are currently in government were elected 3 or 4 years ago. It's changed. So can I know everyone keeps beating on about an alliance-led government. That is correct, incorrect. So I would be happy to work with maybe people from Reform or
Thank you.
JLC, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Julie, your chance.
Well, of course, Jersey Liberals are already in coalition with the Progress Party. We would hope, and we are quite strong that we feel that those two parties together will stand strong together. And until we see what the voting is, then we can't really decide what the next step is. But I know that our team leader, 2 team leaders of JLC and Progress Party will make that decision. But thank you for asking.
Rob?
Yeah, thank you. We have 14 candidates. We're hopeful with our 14 candidates are elected. We would work to produce our manifesto and instigate our manifesto. That's the key. Where are the common ground? Where are the red lines? That's what negotiation is. Intelligent negotiation, with the most important point being what is best for Jersey. Housing crisis needs to be addressed, education needs to be improved, living wage needs to be improved, the cost of living crisis needs to be addressed. We will work with a coalition with anyone who will genuinely address those issues, not just pay lip service to them. That's the important point of any coalition. It's got to work, it's got to be led properly with the right principles, and our party is based upon principles.
Thank you, Karina.
Well, I feel like Rob's left me with nothing else to say. So I think ultimately we would all have to sit down and really assess, look at who would be elected and look at common ground. You know, we have a fully costed and covered manifesto, and that's what we're standing on, and we will work with anyone that will help us, will enable us to get as much of that done as possible in the next term.
Thank you, Jane.
Well, I'm an independent candidate, as is my colleague Neil Kilby. And don't forget, you won't necessarily get everything you want by voting for a party. There's a lot of very strong and well-qualified independent candidates out here. And we are going to be the independent candidates, the ones that get in, and I think there will be a sufficient number of them to be a really strong force. And I think they will form an important part. It will be the case that independents will have a role to play and will be an important part of aligning with propositions, and that will be sought out definitely by all of the parties to work together. And I would be happy to work with anybody. I don't think there's anything that's been said tonight that I'd be against in any strong way. We all, I think, in this room are wanting a cleaner, greener St Helier. We want fairer rents, we want better housing, and something we haven't talked about so far, I definitely want a better tax structure, a fairer tax structure.
Thank you, Catherine.
Megan, I'm just hoping that all the reform candidates get in, because I can tell you that they are all really good. We have business people, people who've been really quite high in the civil service. We've got accountants, we've got community champions. So I really hope that people vote for reform. I think that we will be willing to work with people who agree with the main points of our manifesto.
Thank you. Lindsay.
I'm going to try not to repeat anything that my party colleagues have said, but our priority is delivering on our manifesto. And when we are in negotiations, I hope that we'll have 14 successful candidates that we'll be negotiating off the back of, and we'll be negotiating on the basis of achieving our manifesto key pledges. We've learnt from mistakes of the past, because we were in a coalition that didn't enable us to achieve everything that we wanted to achieve, despite the promises made by the previous Chief Minister, which are clearly outlined in the agreement, which is on our website. So for those people that say it was a secret backroom deal, absolutely was not. You can go back and check that agreement. And our priority will be delivering on that manifesto, whether it's in government or on the backbenches.
Thank you, Neil.
Well, I don't belong to a party, and that's specifically because I believe that the Assembly is there to discuss, so that we get 52 people, whatever it is, together, so that they come up with a better solution than their preconceived ideas. So whilst I understand that some people think they get a stronger position by having a party and being able to horse trade, that's not where I come from. I am of the opinion that we should have the best quality people that we can into the States Assembly, working with everybody else to come up with a better solution than initially that they came up individually or as a party.
Thank you, Jeff.
And as my chairman has said, we have experience in this area. And last time we went into negotiations with the chief, who was to become the chief minister, we tended to talk about support and policies in general terms. Actually, what we should go in there is talk about what action will you take to back up our manifesto, and in how many areas do you more than support, will you bring propositions to assist us to deliver what has been voted in. And really that's what it's about. We need to be hard-nosed about getting actions out of the rest of the membership of the states.
Thank you. Okay, Jane Clements, I'm ask some St Helier questions here now. She says, do you think we can be doing more to encourage nightlife in St Helier, and can we support more live events? So about getting St Helier going socially, I guess. I'll go first to Julie.
Absolutely. There's so many great places and spaces in St Helier Central, North and South. We've got the Hal Davis Park, we've got Millennium Park. There's so many places where we can have events. I learned an awful lot when I lived in Ireland about these particular events, you know, events that are drawn by tourism, island games, you know, music, also for the young people, the young generation, that they can also have a say. I'm going to a youth hustings next week. I'll be listening to them. People to tell me what it is they would like for St Helier Central. It's got fantastic potential, and I really want to listen to younger people and what it is they would like to see in their St Helier. But thank you for asking.
Rob?
A number of things. First of all, we need to make sure that young people have facilities as much as older people. I had £2 million agreed for a youth facility, which we're very close to actually getting, after more work that they bring forward. I also have a particular bias towards live music, and I think one of the problems we have is there is not enough live music in the centre of St Helier in the pubs and bars. The licensing system is out of date. And to be quite frank, nobody understands it, because I've been looking into a way which bars get licenses for live music, and they simply don't. It's too complex. It should be simplified. And after COVID, one of the things we should have done is to say to businesses, okay, there will be no charge for licenses for a year or two, so that we can rejuvenate our music scene on the island. There are so many young and musicians and those throughout their lives. It's such an important issue for St Helier. That's one of the things to do. I'd like to see more nightlife, street cafes and so on. The centre of St Helier in the summer could be anywhere in any Mediterranean country. It's a beautiful place to be, and we should be using it as such.
Thank you. Karina?
Yeah, I think I'd like to just pick up on a point that Rob just raised there. I think there's also facilities that are quickly dwindling to be able to host things like live events. We're seeing many hotels disappear. I'm thinking of one specifically in just on the outskirts of our district, actually, which used to often hold many events, and unfortunately there's not much really to replace that. If I think back to when I was younger, we had Fort Regent, we had roller discos, which were fantastic, and again the government let that facility fall by the wayside. I think ultimately, you know, government needs to make sure that these kind of facilities are kept, maintained, and to ensure that there is a pool here for the youth, because at the moment I don't think that there is. We've heard tonight that a lot of people are leaving the island, not coming back, or going off to study and not coming back. So I think government needs to take on some responsibility there.
Thank you. John?
I'm pleased to say on my way from work tonight, I walked past the Toad at Charing Cross, and there was a brass band playing, and they were playing quite loud, but it wasn't disturbing. However, when I get home on a Friday night, I do find that the one of the hotels that overlooks the marina there, they have a discotheque which plays rather loud music, and it's not the sort of musicality that I appreciate. It's just a loud thumping noise, so I can't even open my balcony doors. So you've got to appreciate that if you have live music, it's got to be compatible with its surroundings. Now, I'm chair of the Western Channel Community Association, and we oversee a lot of the events on People's Park. And we make sure if there's a stage, it faces away from the residents. And you've got to take into account that if you have a big live music event in the centre of town, whether it's in the Parade or perhaps in Millennium, or where there's a lot of residential units around there that could cause problems, parents need to get their kids to bed early, you know, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. If there's loud music coming on, they've got a challenge. So life is a compromise. Live music, yes, at the right place and the right time, and plenty of it.
Thank you. Catherine?
Yes, yeah, I would like to see more nightlife, more going on, but we do have to consider that St Helier is highly populated and that residents do not want too much noise. I actually have a lively pub right opposite where I live, but they are very good. 11 o'clock every night, all the noise just stops. They run well. There used to be a lot more back in the 80s and even 90s. It just seems to be a bit too quiet now. I do think, on the subject of noise, that there shouldn't really be fireworks being let off around midnight. That seems to happen too often. and so many people have got dogs now. It's really upsets them. I think that they should maybe not be going off after 11. As for events in the daytime, I would love to see a farmers market in town, maybe on King Street on Sunday afternoons.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay.
The nighttime economy is a really important part of our economy, both in terms of the financial benefits it brings, but also the benefits that it brings to our community, particularly our community that live in town. Very often they're living in very small, cramped spaces and they need places to go. So for me, the nighttime economy is not just about pubs and bars, as much as I like live music myself as well. It's also about cafes, cinemas, film showings, other art spaces. It's an absolute travesty that the Opera House is still closed, and it's been closed for years. That needs to be resolved. And also we need to look after our arts and cultural spaces and have a good facilities plan to ensure that they are well maintained. I actually worked in music industry development and policy in Australia, and one of the things that we had was a sound attenuation support program for live music venues specifically, because we recognised that live venues, when they're near to people where they live, they need to be sound attenuated.
Thank you very much. Neil.
Yeah, I was at the Jersey Hospitality event where they had a speed dating with a lot of potential candidates. That there is an issue that a lot of the facilities that we all love and enjoy, which is nightclubs, live music, restaurants, you need enough tourism as well to be able to keep that bolster that, because as a community of 100,000 or 110,000 people, we're not going to be able to support all the things that we want. So we do need tourism. The Opera House is a fantastic facility, absolutely love it, but it does not have the ability to fill itself without the tourism that used to be here in the 70s and 80s, where it was just full every day with sort of comedic farces, etc. So we need to have enough tourism in there to bolster all those things we want.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yes, was it this election, previous election, the election before that? Everybody was committed to support event-led tourism. That was the buzz phrase. And I'm thinking, yes, you paid service for that, but it was lip service. Again, no funding was put into it. And I was looking today at how little support was there for the Battle of Flowers, even our major event that definitely generates tourism, visitors to the island, and it's woefully underfunded. So I say bring back the Folk and Blues Festival, bring back the Jazz Festival. Yeah, it's a long time ago, but it's possible to do it. We're still a good destination. Bring back, and this is beyond my ken really, the dub and rap.
Yeah, get in there, Jeff.
Oh, I obviously said it right.
Thank you. I think that's quite enough, Jeff.
I don't think you'd throw me, Jeff. I never thought I'd say this, but to have an ally and a reform candidate with Rob Ward when it comes to licensing, which is my baby, which was written in 1974, and it's completely archaic. It's not fit for purpose in this modern world. Yeah, I'm right at the coalface of this because I've seen the good and the bad times, and there are I think 70 events going on across the island over the next through the summer. What we have to be careful of is we need to protect the small businesses, the restaurants, the small nightclubs, the small bars, because when you put on all these events, all it does is vacuum everyone out of St Helier. So we've got to protect the people who pay rent and rates 12 months of the year and not look up. I'm all for it's a difficult one because I want all the young people to go and have these wonderful days at Jersey Live or whatever it's called now. But also I'd like to see a decrease in duty and also the happy hours brought back in and a reduction in the price of drinks.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to stick with that theme because somebody's asked a question about hospitality businesses and many others are currently facing crisis from not being able to employ staff they need. The census and other data indicates depopulation is underway. Do the candidates believe the current work permit system, therefore, is working. I'll go first to you, Rob.
Yeah, there is a serious problem. We're expecting people to come over here for 9 months, not qualify for anything, go away for 3 months, come back for 9 months and not qualify for anything again. That doesn't work if we're going to attract people. And we need to see hospitality as a much more skilled employment. If you go to areas in France, you see waiters who are respected and are very skilled. That's what we need to be seeing here, and we're not doing that. So that's one of the biggest issues that we face. The licensing system that we're talking about is where the license follows the person. So the businesses who skill them up can keep that person. And it's smaller businesses who are suffering with not being able to get the licenses that they require to maintain and keep their businesses going. We know this because we've spoken to people, and we have small business owners in the party who are running with us and are supporting us. So it's really important that we deal with that. Unfortunately, the whatever population policy they called it was just paper, and it did nothing to solve our problems.
Thank you, Karina.
Thank you. I think part of the problem is that this has also been brought on because of Brexit. Brexit is causing a number of difficulties, so we're a bit restricted in what we can do as an island as well. I do believe, obviously, we believe as a party that the license, that the permits should be following the employees, so that there's less risk of employees being taken advantage of, for example. There are also concerns as to what employees would qualify for. I know that I've recently dealt with somebody who was only here for a few months and got injured at work and ended up with a broken arm, and there's been some real difficulties there around accessing healthcare and things like that. I share the concerns of the person that's asked the question with regards to there being a decrease in people coming, and I think we just need to monitor that and look at what we can do as an island to increase, to not allow that to happen.
Thanks, John.
Well, I've got problems in my own business employing staff, and that's really down to coronavirus and the fact that we've had a lot of people leave the island. But I think the problem is that we need to bring Jersey into the 21st century. Our laws are so antiquated. I mean, it's the workplace laws, the work laws, our tax laws come from the 1920s. We really need to drag the whole island into the 21st century and stop tinkering with these laws. We say, oh, well, we just do this and we just do that, and we end up with it still with a mess. So I think we need to wipe the slate clean and say, look, have a seminar, have a workshop with the people that need employing and the people that can employ them, and say, right, what circumstances are going to work for the island, and actually redress how these systems work. So have a complete rethink of a lot of these employment laws and rental accommodation laws, and indeed the tax laws and others. Even dogs on the beach, that is so last century.
Catherine.
I think the main problem is about accommodation. We need key worker accommodation, and at the recent there was a recent meeting, GPs held candidates, and even GPs are not wanting to come to the island because they can get a better standard of living elsewhere because the housing is so expensive. So if we can provide good key worker accommodation, I think that will help an awful lot. As a sort of side point, I spoke to the Salvation Army recently about why people were using food banks and who was using food banks. And one of the groups were people who were being brought into the island for a specific job, and then they were sacked, or their job wasn't there anymore, and they were just stuck. They didn't know what to do. They didn't have enough money to get back to their original home.
Thank you. Lindsay.
The hospitality industry plays an important part in our balanced economy. It's really important that we have a thriving hospitality industry because it does encourage people to stay here and remain here. Lots of people are concerned about a brain drain, people leaving the island because of the cost of living. Now, unfortunately, people in the hospitality industry are those that might be at the lowest end of the pay scale. And Reform Jersey has done that thinking that John was referring to earlier. And our key pledges include looking after people at that minimum wage level to bring that up to the living wage, and also removing GST on food and other essential items to make Jersey a more attractive place for people to stay, including those people that are working in the hospitality sector, that I know are people that are running hospitality in hospitality businesses are concerned about losing.
Thank you. Neil?
I spoke with the head of the Hospitality Association last week for about an hour and a half. Their major issues is that it's trying to get people here. It is lockdown, it is Brexit, and it is cost of accommodation. They are just so prohibitive. They are trying now to get people from places like Barbuda, where when they bring somebody over, it costs them £2,500 for the flights, then 500, £600 for visas. So there's a massive cost in trying to get people to come here, and they are not that underpaid as you would think. They do get reasonably decent wages. So we need to allow these entrepreneurs and businesses to breathe and exist and bring these people in, because they are facilities that we've all agreed that we want them. So we need to allow them in and to happen. And a 9 months license is just not enough, because these people they haven't been trained up well enough in that period of time for them to be able to recoup the costs. So they need to be 2 years, but they're on a permit. We know where they are and what they're doing. So there you go.
Thank you. Jeff?
We have to ask the question of why people who are already on the island don't choose to work in particular areas. And then we have to address the issue of, is the question of more training, because we need to invest in that training to get the right skills in the right place. But when it comes down to it, it's actually about market forces. If you cannot recruit and keep your workforce, then you have to look at obeying the first rule of paying them more. And maybe the locals do want to then do the job because they can see it's worthwhile. At the moment, with rental levels and wages as they are, it's simply not worth them going for the jobs. And there is at least one hotelier who's doing an excellent job paying the living wage already and still making it a success. It's possible.
Thank you. Chris?
I know Lindsay wants to correct me on something earlier, but I'll correct her quickly on the wages that hospitality people are getting. It was notoriously badly paid for years. What has come out of a combination of COVID and Brexit is people in hospitality are actually getting a decent wage now. I know because I pay some of those wages. The other fundamental problem is how we get local people to go into this wonderful trade, which has been part of my life for 45 years. It just seems that the youngsters coming through do not want to work in hospitality. That's why before Brexit we were recruiting from Eastern Europe. Unfortunately, because of circumstances, we've lost that group of people. So we're now getting Kenyans and Filipinos. Without these people, none of us will be able to dine. We will not have restaurants, and we will not have a nightlife at all. So I think it's one of the bigger problems that we need to address.
Thank you. Julie?
Hospitality is extremely, extremely important. And I didn't know that 80 to 100% of food that is in the hospitality sector is actually local. So as a government, we definitely need to support those entrepreneurs, exactly as you said, that are taking on these 9-month permits and then finding out they have to retrain the staff over and over and over again. Then they have to pay people £70,000 to recruit those people and at the same time find them somewhere to live. We have to find a solution, especially when there are 3 areas to this: tourism, agriculture and hospitality. And as a government, those 3 are as important as each other. And as a government, we've got to get our heads around this one.
Okay, thank you. Right, moving on to something which is essential in St Helier because of traffic, of course. Rob Hayward has asked, how would you convince fellow states members that we need to take brave steps, new steps, to enable islanders to walk, cycle and use public transport more as an alternative to private car travel? Goes first to Gwyn.
I think ultimately we need to look at other jurisdictions where these kinds of things are working really well. and show members that it does work, it is possible, and we can do it. I think members have always been reluctant maybe to take that first step, but we're actually in many areas we should be leading the way. We are a small jurisdiction, we do have the resources, we do have the infrastructure, and we could be quite easily experimenting things. I think, you know, we can try and convince members, but ultimately the public have to vote for the right people who will drive these type of things forward.
Thank you, John.
Well, there's lots of incentives we could still make. I mean, Jersey's, again, you know, behind the times. Such things as workplace parking levies are very common in the UK. We've got, for instance, the finance centre's got, every single building there's got 40 car spaces below. Those people are encouraged to drive to work because they've got a free parking space. If there was a workplace parking levy, that levy on those private car parking spaces would deter people from driving. But at the same time, what we've got to do, we've got to improve the transport links. We've got a reasonably good bus service, but that's focused on St Helier, and it goes out from St Helier and, you know, to the strings of the various parishes. But if you want to go from Gorey to Corbier or Gorey to Gromay, there's no way to go across the island. So we've got to think of better links. The town needs a hopper bus service, and we need, you know, more walkable in terms of the town itself. We need it to be more walkable and more cyclable. Infrastructure over the years has let us down because they haven't had a proper policy, so we haven't got safer cycling routes, and we need to progress that.
Thank you, Catherine.
We have to make things nicer for people to walk and cycle. You know, for example, the improvements on Midvale Road with much wider pavements, it is so much better to walk down there now, and it's a safety issue because there were accidents. People being clipped by wing mirrors and so on. I actually got an electric bike a few months ago, and I haven't used it a lot yet because a few times I've been out on it, I've had cars pass me so closely. It's been a bit scary. So I think that with cycling, you get to a tipping point, and we will get there at some point. Recently, I was driving on the inner road, and there were so many cyclists. I actually realised it would have been better for me to be on a bike than in the car. Reform Jersey has already brought in a £20 bus pass for young people.
Thank you.
Lindsay.
To go to the question around convincing other states members, one thing that I do, I mean, Karina got that answer bang on. The voters need to elect people that are willing to vote for sustainable transport options. But the one thing I do is invite those states members to come and walk along Rouge Bouillon with me on a daily basis and actually have a look at the traffic. Then they'd understand the problem for people living in St Helier. We need clean air. One of our key pledges within our manifesto is to renegotiate the bus contract. The bus contract needs to be renegotiated to provide much better value for the people of the island and a much more sustainable and better transport option for those coming into town. The fewer cars that we have on the road, the more likelihood there is of people actually cycling. Catherine mentioned about how she doesn't like cycling because of danger on the roads. So we need to reduce that traffic first through bus usage, and then hopefully more people cycle and walk.
Thank you, Neil.
I couldn't agree more. Jersey is completely car-centric. Every car, when it's parked in any space, takes up effectively the same space as one person's accommodation. So that's wherever it's being parked and at the other end of the journey, plus all the roads in between. So, and St Helier Central is the area in the whole of Jersey that suffers with that. So from West Park, Rouge Bouillon, St Saviour's Road, it is horrendous, it is unpleasant. And as you were saying about cycling, it's not pleasant to cycle in the town. It's uncomfortable in terms of air quality, but also the drivers feel that they have precedence. So once cars start to get properly costed in Jersey, because it costs £143 to park a car at Pier Road for a whole month, if that space was an apartment, that'd be £2,500. So we don't have a proper costing in Jersey of what the cost is of vehicles.
Jeff.
Yes, may I first pay tribute to my colleague Rob Ward, who has been responsible for a number of green initiatives in the States and continue to promote exactly the path we should be taking. And I just want to pick out one particular aspect. I'm hearing people saying the choice of the Overdale site for the hospital presents many people with a problem of imagining how they're going to get there. And one of the things I think should be early on in our workings towards the hospital when it starts to be built is that we have to supply excellent transport, if necessary, door to door, to make sure that people who are ill can get to the hospital and recover. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
I think I go back to the clean and green, which I said earlier on, and yeah, thank goodness there's not senatorials this year because it wouldn't make me popular with the island-wide vote. But as I'm representing St Helier, I'd like to say north, south, and central, is to get rid of the cars as much as we can from St Helier. I remember when we had all this outrage over closing Mulcaster Street on a Friday and Saturday after 10 o'clock. People were outraged, but if you tell people to do something, eventually they get used to going up and over, going a different way. So I'm all for more pedestrianisation in central St Helier, get the cars out of St Helier, and with more sustainable buses. Let's go green on the buses. I think that's the other thing which the bus people are looking at the moment. I'm all, as I say, I'm clean and green, and let's get St Helier
Thank you.
looking beautiful as it should be.
I absolutely agree with you. I spoke to a cyclist today, actually, we had a laugh. He was showing me some areas in St Helier Central that are actually for cyclists. And from here to here, and then you stop. And then you cross the road, and it's here to here. Let's stop the piecemeal. Let's do it absolutely. We are going to upset lots of people. I agree. The town needs to have less cars. We've just got to get on with it. And this cyclist would love to get on his bicycle and have a proper cycle and enjoy the cycle ride instead of piecemeal pieces, which are costing a fortune and not solving the problem. Thank you, Rob.
Okay, just 1 minute. What have we actually done in Reform Jersey? We have an under 19s bus pass for £20. There's around 5,000 young people who now have access to buses, and that's the way you change culture. You start with young people. That took 3.5 years of indifference from the rest of the assembly, but we kept going and we kept fighting. £1.4 million moved away from subsidising electric cars to active transport systems that can work. Speak to the Dutch cycling embassy that came over here. We've mapped out what can be done. It just needs money. There's money there now. A genuine climate change emergency, which drove all of this, was brought by us as Reform Jersey. A sustainable transport policy that was then developed by government, which is totally inadequate. Turning right out of the bus station and building some bus stops is not a sustainable transport policy. There are things that we can do. We must take action. The time is right now because people want that change. We don't even monitor clean air because they haven't got it right. I have asked so many questions on this over the last 4 years.
Thank you very much. Okay, next question comes from John Davis. Jeff, you mentioned the hospital. Doomed wall to a question on it. Okay, no. Should the hospital be at Overdale? Further, should there be a review into the contractual discussions and awarding of a hospital contract for Spanish firm? That will go first to John.
Well, I'm on Friends of New Hospital Group, so we follow this very closely. I honestly do believe Overdale is a good site for a hospital. Whether it's the right site for the hospital that they've designed and wish to build there is another argument. I think as we move forward to a new States Assembly, we need to readdress the whole issue. Anne Pryke had a plan not so many years ago to build a two-site hospital for under 400 million. Why have we suddenly got to this 800 million plus, and now it will be $1 billion because we've waited for too long? So I think Overdale's a great site for recovery, for Samurai ward and that type of thing, so for an outpatients department, etc. But I think it's just possible in the next assembly we'll revisit the whole thing, look at the costings, and I think it's the cost of the hospital that's going to be the thing we've got to focus on. And we could revisit the idea of a twin site, an acute hospital at Gloucester Street, and a recovery area with new wards, and maybe something that could handle the pandemic, for instance. So if you built a new block up there, would be able to utilise Overdale properly.
Catherine.
I don't think there were any perfect sites for the hospital. My son actually works in the hospital in the haematology lab, and it's not fit for purpose as it is now. It hasn't been for some time. It will be good to actually have a new hospital. I know that the costs seem to be extremely high, so we really need to keep an eye on that. I think some of the things about the new one are going to be really good. The fact that both it's going to incorporate the mental health facilities into the main hospital as well. Yeah, I think that really it needs to be done and get on with it, and we need to keep an eye on costs.
Thank you, Lindsay.
I think there were better sites for the new hospital, such as the waterfront site. Unfortunately, previous governments let that go, and we're now in a situation where we're in critical need of a new hospital, and to go back to the drawing board is just not an option. I was speaking to people just on my way here actually that work at the hospital that were telling me you know, how critical that need is, and also I spoke with a constituent just today who'd just come out of the hospital who was telling me how sorry she was for the nurses that are having to work in the conditions that they're working in. Only a few months ago, newborn babies were having to wear ear defenders when they were just born, because our current hospital is in such a state of disrepair. This situation cannot go on. I actually think that the location of the hospital has become a red herring to hide other critical issues within our health service, such as the bullying culture.
Thank you. Sorry, Neil.
Okay. As a business person and somebody who thinks from efficiency, the fact that we're paying so much for a hospital is just horrendous, and the positioning of it, the size of it, and the way it faces out onto St Albans Bay is to make it a landmark project, which as soon as I hear words like landmark, first class, world class, I think vanity project. It is not the right size for Jersey. Whether it's the right location, I don't have a particular problem with the location. I do prefer a two-site option, but I think having spent £50 million to decide something was wrong is one of my problems. We didn't have a clear project in mind before we started, and all the costings just got it out of the way, and then we spent another £50 million in a rush to come up with something which is inappropriate.
Thank you, Jeff.
Well, if you go up to Overdale and take a look at the site, what you find is that it is a large site. It's a large site and it's fairly level. So the best decision, I believe, has been made for that site. And effectively it's future-proofed. So if we need new facilities, if we need new treatments, then there's room to expand on the site. All the other sites actually were significantly smaller than that site, and that's why it's been chosen, I believe. Any delay in moving forward is going to mean another cost. It might, another £20 million on top of £60 million that we've already wasted is likely to happen for investigating a two-site hospital or any other site for that matter. The crisis, the thing that's going to affect most our ability to have a health service.
Thank you, Jeff. Sorry.
Is to attract and retrain workers.
Well, if only hindsight is such a fine thing, but rewinding many years, all the services should have been put on the waterfront instead of the car park that we've got now. We could have had the fire department, the police department, and the hospital all together. But anyway, unfortunately, we lost that opportunity. In 2017, I was at an event in England, and I was sitting next to a gentleman who works for a French company. He's based in London, and amongst other things, they build hospitals. And we got on about the Jersey hospital, and it was only at the bargain price of 500 million then. And he asked the population of Jersey and everything else, and it was 45 square miles. And when I told him it was 500 million, he said, we've just built a hospital in Wren with a population of about 1 million for 250 million. How did we ever get to nearly 900 million and counting?
Thank you, Julie.
We cannot waste any more money. JLC and the Progress Party will look at the information in relation to this new hospital. We will review it. But one thing is for sure, we want it to be in the right place, but particularly at the right price. And on a final conclusion on this, I will say one thing, and this is coming from the staff in the hospital. We need a hospital, not a hotel.
Okay.
It would be criminal negligence to waste £100 million, go back to the drawing board for plans that are not necessarily agreed on by the clinical staff who don't necessarily want a two-site hospital. We are in a position with Form Jersey voted against releasing all of the money at the beginning. We voted against the releasing of £800 million. We can build a hospital. We don't need a superhighway. We don't need to spend £800 million. We can facilitate the needs of this island. It's a site which is future-proofed, as was mentioned earlier, which is important. And the hospital at the moment is not fit for purpose. Let's not waste money. Let's spend that money on reducing waiting lists, giving care for people when they need it, having care for the elderly. We've been knocking on the doors. There are people that, there's a gentleman today who's in genuine pain because he's not getting the care that he's needed. And we're talking about going backwards and wasting £100 million. Go and explain that to that gentleman who struggled to get to the door. I'm not going to. I'd rather he have the care he needs.
Thank you, Gwyn.
So I was on the first board of politicians that looked at the decision making for the hospital in this term of office, and obviously we looked at the different sites. I myself had my mind changed because I didn't think that Overdale was ideal. Like has been mentioned before, there's been a lack of long-term vision. I actually think that, you know, if we go as far back as we can, if we look at the Spectrum buildings, for example, that could have been taken over by government. The current hospital could have stayed where it was, and we could have had an extension there. Anyway, a two-site option, I don't think is an option. That would increase the clinical risk. The scrutiny panel that I was on, the health scrutiny panel, we published a number of recommendations when we did our recent mental health review. And one of them was to make sure that both mental health and physical health are co-located. With regards to the contractual review, this will cause delays. We need to be attracting people to this island. A new hospital will do that.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm going to be tough with everybody. Okay. Right. Quick one for you. What facilities, says Penny, would you want for the use of St Helier?
Right.
Yes,
Okay, we need a good youth centre, and I believe that one of my former colleagues has done a lot of work on that already. It's something that's really essential because young people are not feeling great at the moment, generally with high levels of anxiety. So a good youth centre is one of the facilities that's very important.
Thank you, Lindsay.
I'll let Rob talk about the youth centre later, but I think what the youth of this island want is a future on island where they can get the education that they want, the training they want, the opportunity to go to university if they wish to and return back to the island. They want affordable housing. I speak to lots of people who aren't actually traditional Reform Jersey supporters, but they own their own home, and they're saying to us, our children, we feed for our children. So what I want for the youth of St Helier is an island that they want to remain in. So that's an island that has all of those things we've been talking about, which is nightlife, entertainment, job opportunities, and diverse job opportunities in all sorts of industries and sectors. Lots of people will want to go and work in the finance industry, but we also need to look at economic diversification. So for me, what the youth of my vision for the youth of St Helier is a St Helier that they want to live in.
Thanks.
Talking specifically about facilities for children, I think it's a slight misdirection. Where if we had small community centres, which are used by the young in the evenings, the older people during the day, and was used as a centre of a community, because I genuinely believe St Helier Central lacks little pinpoints of centre of community. The Millennium Park has done a brilliant job for a lot of the kids, absolutely brilliant. Far better than the car park that used to be there. But yes, I think the French have a commune system, and they would normally have a hall or something that sort of size that is used for the whole of the community, but specifically the kids can engage with when it's their time.
Thanks, Neil. Jeff?
Young people need affordable access to their GPs. At the moment, they don't have that, and they have to go via their parents and pay significant sums, so they can't actually get confidential advice from their GP. And that should be on our list, and is on our list, of ways to expand the access to GPs. Ultimately, we're aiming at free GPs for everybody on this island. It'll take some time to get there, but I think that's our aim.
Thank you. Chris?
Well, once the hospital fiasco is over, we can then start with the other fiasco, which is Fort Regent. I'm sure we all remember when we were younger, and I remember coming back to the island in 1977, and we all made our way up to Fort Regent because there was so much happening. All the young people went up there. I know it was a different time, but surely to goodness, if the government aren't going to do something about Fort Regent, let's hand it over to private enterprise, and we could create such an amazing hub with so many different things, with all the modern technology today. I'm not talking about Disneyland, but along those lines. I mean, I remember the days around the moats where there was all these activities. I know it was a different time, but we can recreate the good times at Fort Regent. It's sitting there just waiting to happen. Let's look after the youth of today. They're the next generation, and we need to support them and give them something to do other than sitting at home on their phones or their computers or whatever.
Julie?
You've taken my thunder.
Sorry.
Fort Regent, all my life, tough background, used to be dropped off at 9 in the morning, picked up at 4. It was heaven. The young people have missed so much. As a government, I want Fort Regent to be for the young people. I want them to tell us what they want. It's theirs as it was for us. Let's give it to them. Let's not make it a casino. Let's not make it into pure profit. The profit will come from membership like it did years ago. It might be different, but it must not be for anyone other than the young people of this island, and I will fight for that.
Thank you. Rob?
Okay, there's £2 million put aside for youth facilities in St Helier. I trusted people to get it done. I learned that if you want anything done, you do it yourself. So I brought a proposition to protect the Nelson Street site. It can only be built as a youth facility. There was also a youth facility built at the brewery site. That should be done in the first year of the new term. I'm standing as a St Helier deputy because I want to see these projects through. They are essential. We need to make the youth service statutory so that they have the money and the facility to go and help young people. And we need to encourage sport in a way that is accessible to ordinary young people, not excluded in any way because they can't afford to do it. We had a blow-up football thing in Millennium Park, and it was free and it was great. And the young people who were having problems got involved. Football, great leveler, brings people together. Suddenly, it was over £200 to hire it. Those charges do not help our young people. Let's get it accessible for our young people.
Thank you. Karina?
Rob, you've got to stop doing that. So specific to our district, I would say Springfield Stadium is an area that we really need to fight for to ensure it carries on doing what it's doing. I'm really pleased to see there's been some improvements, but at one point it was actually possibly in jeopardy, actually, and I think that's a real focal point for the community in our central district. Kind of more generally, I think we need to protect our school facilities as well, and ensure that we've got the space to expand for them. As a party, we've been hounding the education minister and making sure that things like, for example, the old Rouge Bouillon police station site doesn't just automatically go to the emergency services, for example, that there is a thorough review done of the education estate, and that Rouge Bouillon is an option for the Rouge Bouillon school to extend into, as that would be the safest option.
Thank you, John.
Well, Jersey Sport reminded us this week that fewer than 1 in 5 children in Jersey are currently getting the recommended amount of exercise. But also, new figures show that half of adults are similarly not getting enough exercise. My manifesto is about more amenity space. Extending Millennium Park, not necessarily with the school, because if you have a school needs outside space, but it needs safe space. You can't have people sharing it. So extending Millennium Park, making lots of pocket parks in the town centre. My aim is that every single person that lives in St Helier is no longer than 5 minutes away from green open space. I'd like parents to come home from school and think, I've got 15 minutes spare, I can take the kids to the park, but not have to travel for 20 minutes or so to reach some green space. I want green space on my doorstep, and that's my answer.
Thank you. Okay, time for one very final question. I'll try to get one question per person, not doing multiple questions from individuals. So, Bruin, you've said many of the initiatives mentioned tonight are fantastic, but they'll require a lot of funding. I'm concerned that you'll raise taxes, social security contributions and GST. How can you reassure the electorate that individuals won't have to pay more from their wages? That's going to go first to Lindsay.
Okay. The first thing is our manifesto is costed, it's fully costed. A lot of the funding is already there within the government plan and within government projects. It's around us as a government giving clear direction to public servants as to where they are to prioritise expenditure and what government priorities are. So, for example, Senator Mezek, when he was housing minister, secured funding for first-time buyers, and that needed to be a priority, but that hasn't eventuated because that got put on the back burner by other politicians. We also are in favour of progressive taxation. At the moment, we are seeing regressive taxation, which is hardest hitting on middle and lower income earners. So some of our additional income would come from scrapping the cap on social security contributions, and that will.
Thank you. Neil.
Yeah, this is the most important bit, is that we don't end up in a spend culture. For me, the major concern, and I think we can all agree on, is the lack of control that is going on in the states. We see a never-ending growing states, more and more people employed from it. 100 million, like Kevin Keene's article in the JEP about the accounts. So absolutely excellent. Please read it. He was saying there's £100 million being spent every year more than there used to be. Okay, there's 1,000 more employees gone into the states over the last 4 years. This is where the expenditure is. There has never been a zero-based budget, meaning that nobody's costed from the ground up, from what are we doing to what are we paying for and how is it all done. There's no link. And we just need to get in there and fully understand the finances of the states first. Because if we keep just throwing money at the states, it will just go.
Thank you, Jeff.
Nobody's suggesting throwing money at the states, least of all me. The fact is that we are proposing to scrap the cap on contributions from employers who employ people earning over £250,000. That seems to me a reasonably progressive method. So we'll get, and we've got a tax plan to reduce taxes for most people and only have more tax from the very tiniest, smallest sliver of the very wealthiest. And that's a start. It's a move in the right direction towards progressive taxation. We've had too much of governments working only for the very wealthy and not for ordinary workers in Centelia.
Thank you, Chris.
I'd like a good leader. I've always surrounded myself with good generals. So within Jersey Alliance, there's far better people qualified than me to deal with the financial side of things, as accountants and other stuff. I would just, if elected, want to scrutinise the spending more, and just again get back to accountability. As I say, I'm not an accountant, and hopefully if I was elected, once I got to see the machinery of government and how it works, then I'd have a better insight into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Jersey Liberal Conservatives and the Progress Party, it's all about cutting the waste. We'll get the budget of the hospital down. We'll cut the waste that's going on left, right and centre on this island. And we'll also look at the amount of money that's being spent on expensive consultants. Once we've had that review, I bet you we will have savings where we can look at the 4 regions, we can look at lots of wonderful, exciting things that we as an island should be doing long term for future generations and today.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay. The blame is not simply with the civil servants and the frontline workers who are looking after our people. The blame is with the misspend from government. £100 million on Cyril and Markham House for a vanity project. Millions wasted on the hospital because they cannot have a coordinated decision because they've never been a coordinated group. We need progressive taxation, fair taxation, and that's what we stand for. And I reassure the questioner, with Reform Jersey, you will have a cut in your tax, everybody going onto the same tax system, everyone having the same tax allowances, but not the rich and those very wealthy people who can afford more, and many of whom we've spoken to say quite willing to pay more actually at this time of risk and danger for our society, so that you will have more money in your pocket and you won't have to spend it on GST on food, because we will remove that and give that money back to you in your pockets.
Thank you. Karina.
Thank you. Reform Jersey has always been against regressive tax. We voted against GST. I think we need to, obviously our tax policy will actually decrease taxes for the majority of the working population, and that's the middle to lower class. We have to be realistic. Obviously the money does have to come somewhere, and we do have a document that outlines all of that, but we won't be targeting those who can't afford it. That's absolutely what we are not about. We are about equality and fairness. At the moment, our system is rigged towards the rich. Proportionally, those who are a lot better off do not contribute in the same way as others in our society. I think other things that have been mentioned today, like proper oversight of spending. We have the CNAG, the Controller and Auditor General, who produces reports quite regularly looking at past spending with our Public Accounts Committee. So those recommendations need to be looked at and implemented.
Thank you, John.
Well, my plans, as I mentioned, the Garden City movement. Not only do we have some sources of income that wouldn't hit the man in the street, but we have something called a community infrastructure levy. Now, that's something common in Jersey at the moment, but it's on a low scale. Certainly, the parish of St Helier at the moment is about to embark on some improvements to Rue de la Tow. For those that don't know the street name, it's the road in front of Castle Quay. Now, that road is not very safe. There's a lot of pedestrians, and certainly when the Horizon's built, there'll be a lot more pedestrians in the area. So we are taking an amount of money that's been a commitment from the SOJDC for the Horizon project, and we're going to put 3 new zebra crossings in. We're going to put new street lighting. We're going to make some improvements to the general area. So community infrastructure levies, I think, are something important that as developers move in and invest in their sites, they don't need to walk away with all the millions. They should make a contribution to the local community, and that contribution can go towards my idea for pocket parks and open spaces.
Thank you, Catherine.
We can get more funding by increasing productivity. Productivity has been declining in Jersey for 20 years. We have an amazing finance industry here with a lot of skill and knowledge, and they've got some very exciting plans towards sustainable finance and a green economy, which Reform Jersey fully supports. We need to support our traditional industries and small businesses in Jersey, and we can get more funds from this. There's even the new tech fund based here at Digital Jersey, which is very exciting, and I think we can get some new industries with which are very productive and bring more funds to the island.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, that's it. That's all we've got time for. Just a reminder to everybody at home, if you are going to be off island when the election takes place, you have until tomorrow, I think it's at midday, to get your application in for postal voting. You can find out, of course, all the information about that on vote.je. And the next candidate question time is tomorrow. It's going to be with the candidates for Deputies St Mary, St One, St Peter. Again, you can go to the Zoom link at vote.je to join in and just get all the information from there. Thank you for all of you at home for watching. I'd like to say thank you once finally to all the candidates here for being here. Karina Alves, who is Reform Jersey, John Baker, who's an independent candidate, Catherine Curtis, who's also Reform Jersey, Lindsay Feltham, who is Reform Jersey, Neil Kilby, who is an independent candidate, Jeff Southern, who is Reform Jersey, Chris Tanguy, Jersey Alliance, Julie Warman, who is Jersey Liberal Conservatives, and finally to Rob Ward, who is also Reform Jersey. Thank you very much for joining us.